Chosen one, listen closely. They picked you because you looked easy. Wrong move. Big mistake. Right now, somewhere, they're checking their messages, avoiding your name, hoping nobody brings up what they did. Because the version of you they thought they were dealing with, that version is gone. They swung. They celebrated for about 5 minutes. And then it all came back around so fast, they didn't even see the door close behind them. You already feel it, don't you? That shift where the room goes quiet the second your name comes up. That silence isn't respect they're offering freely. That's fear wearing a polite mask. They messed with the wrong one, and now they're too scared to even show their face. Not scared of what you'll say, scared of what everyone already knows. Let's go back to where this started, because the setup matters. They didn't attack you out of nowhere. They calculated it. They watched you stay quiet in situations that would have made other people snap, and they mistook that calm for weakness they could use. They watched you let things go, let comments slide, let disrespect sit there unanswered, and they wrote a story in their heads. This one won't push back. This one doesn't have the nerve. This one is safe to step on. That was their whole plan. Not a dramatic scheme, just a quiet decision that you were the kind of person who absorbs damage and says nothing. They tested that theory in small ways first. A comment here, an exclusion there. A joke made at your expense in front of people who should have said something and didn't. And when nothing happened, when you didn't explode, didn't cry in front of them, didn't give them the reaction they were hunting for, they got bolder. They mistook your restraint for permission. That's the mistake that's costing them right now. Before we go further, if this is already hitting close to home, hit that like button and subscribe. Not for me, for the message, so it reaches the next person who needs to hear that their silence was never weakness. Pay it back to the universe, and let's keep going. Here's what they didn't calculate. Every single thing they did, while they thought no one was watching, someone was watching. Every quiet dismissal, every excuse they made for their own behavior, every time they smiled at you in public and talked about you the second you walked away, all of it was being logged somewhere they couldn't erase. Not by you. You were too busy holding yourself together to keep score. But the universe keeps a ledger they forgot existed, and ledgers don't forget. They don't lose pages. They don't get talked out of what they recorded. And when that ledger opens, it doesn't open quietly. It opens exactly when they're standing in the middle of a room full of people, feeling untouchable. So let's talk about what's actually happening right now, because this is the part they can't explain to anyone, including themselves. The confidence they walked around with when they crossed you, that's gone. The swagger they had when they thought this would end in their favor, gone. What replaced it is something they've never had to deal with before. Consequences with a name attached, and that name is yours. Chosen one, if you feel that pull in your chest right now, drop a 77 in the comments so I know you're locked in for what comes next. Because we're about to go step by step through exactly how this unraveled, and why the person hiding right now is not you. Number 1. They thought you'd never find out how far they went. Every plan built on secrecy has one weakness, and it's simple. Secrets only work as long as nobody talks, and somebody always talks. They believed the version of events they created in private would stay private forever. They believed the messages they sent about you, the conversations they had behind closed doors, the little digs they made when they thought you'd never hear about it. They believed all of that would stay buried. That's the first mistake people like this always make. They forget that everyone they whisper to is a person with their own conscience, their own limits, their own moment where they get tired of carrying someone else's dirty secret. And that moment always comes. Someone who used to nod along got uncomfortable. Someone who used to laugh at the jokes started feeling sick about it. Someone who used to stay quiet decided silence wasn't worth the wait anymore. And piece by piece, the story they built started leaking out from the exact people they trusted to keep it sealed. Imagine building a house entirely out of promises other people made to keep your secrets, and never once checking if those promises would hold under pressure. That's the house they built, and it's already cracking at the foundation. You didn't have to dig for any of this. You didn't have to confront a single person or demand answers. You just kept living your life, kept showing up as yourself, kept refusing to shrink, and the truth did the digging on its own. That's the part that eats at them the most. They can't even be angry at a specific person for exposing them, because it wasn't one leak. It was the slow, inevitable collapse of a story that was never solid to begin with. Ask yourself why people build elaborate lies instead of just being honest in the first place. It's because honesty requires them to face what they actually did, and they'd rather construct an entire alternate version of reality than sit with that discomfort for even a minute. But alternate realities don't hold up under scrutiny. They fracture the second real information touches them, and real information is touching this one right now, piece by piece, name by name, message by message. Think about how long a secret like this actually has to survive. It's not enough for it to hold for a week, or a month, or even a year. It has to hold forever, permanently, under every kind of pressure, every accidental slip, every unrelated conversation that happens to wander too close to the truth. That's an impossible standard. Nobody maintains a lie that well for that long, because lies require constant maintenance, and maintenance requires energy that eventually runs out. They didn't account for how exhausting it is to keep a story straight across dozens of people, dozens of conversations, dozens of moments where one wrong word could unravel months of careful positioning. Eventually, the exhaustion shows. Eventually, someone gets tired of managing the performance and lets something slip, not out of malice, just out of the simple human limitation of trying to hold too many versions of the same lie in their head at once. And here's what makes it worse for them. The people who eventually talked weren't strangers. They were people who had been close enough to see the whole thing unfold, which means the details they carried weren't vague or second-hand. They were specific. They were dated. They were the kind of details that don't sound like gossip. They sound like testimony. That's the difference between a rumor that fades and a story that sticks. Rumors are vague enough to be dismissed. This wasn't vague. This had names, timelines, screenshots, memories that lined up too well with what other people remembered too. They thought you'd never find out how far they went. You didn't have to find out. It found you. And now the same people who helped them build the lie are the ones quietly walking away from it, because nobody wants to be standing next to a house when it finally comes down. That's chapter 1 of their unraveling, and chosen one, it only gets louder from here. Number 2. The confidence that made them careless. Here's something people forget about arrogance. It doesn't just make you loud, it makes you sloppy. When someone believes they're untouchable, they stop covering their tracks the way a careful person would. They start saying things out loud that should have stayed in their head. They start doing things in public that should have stayed hidden, because in their mind, there's no version of the story where they get caught, so why bother being careful? That's exactly what happened here. The confidence they built off underestimating you made them careless in a way that eventually became impossible to hide. They said things in front of the wrong person. They did things in a place with too many eyes. They assumed that because you hadn't reacted yet, you never would, and that assumption made them bold in all the wrong ways. Imagine a thief who's never been caught, so they stop checking over their shoulder. They start walking slower. They start leaving fingerprints everywhere, because they've convinced themselves the rules don't apply to them anymore. That's exactly the energy they were carrying when they crossed you, and it's exactly the energy that's now working against them, because careless people leave evidence. Careless people give people around them reasons to doubt the story they've been telling. Careless people forget that confidence and invincibility are not the same thing, no matter how similar they feel in the moment. You never had to catch them in the act. You never had to set a trap or wait around with a camera rolling. They caught themselves. Every overconfident move, every dismissive comment made where it shouldn't have been made, every assumption that nobody important was paying attention, that was them building their own case against themselves, one careless moment at a time. Why does this always happen to people who think they're untouchable? Because untouchable is a feeling, not a fact. And feelings don't hold up when actual scrutiny arrives. The moment people started asking real questions, the moment the story stopped being one-sided, all that careless confidence turned into panic, because suddenly they had to account for things they never thought they'd have to explain. And explaining careless behavior after the fact is so much harder than just being careful in the first place. Here's the thing about that kind of confidence. It doesn't just make someone careless in the moment, it makes them careless retroactively too, because they never went back to clean anything up. They never deleted the messages. They never quietly walked back the comments. They never treated any of it as something that might one day matter, because in their mind, it never would. That's the gap between someone who's actually careful and someone who's just loud enough to seem untouchable. A careful person considers what happens if this gets seen by the wrong eyes. They never did that math, not once, because doing that math would have required admitting, even privately, that what they were doing might be wrong enough to need hiding. And admitting that was never something their ego could tolerate. So now, all of it just sits there, unedited, unfiltered, available to anyone who eventually goes looking, because they never treated any of it as evidence until it already was. Imagine someone confessing to something in writing, over and over, in a dozen different conversations, simply because they never imagined a version of events where those words would be read back to them in a different context, in a room full of people who now know exactly what to look for. They know that now. They're living it right now. Every text they wish they hadn't sent, every comment they wish they hadn't made in front of the wrong person, all of it is sitting there, unable to be unsent, unable to be unsaid. That's chapter 2. The very thing that made them feel powerful is the exact thing taking that power away, piece by piece, and there's nothing they can do to put it back together. Number 3. The people who used to laugh with them started stepping back. There's a specific kind of silence that happens right before someone's support system collapses, and it's not obvious at first. It starts small. Someone stops replying as fast. Someone finds a reason to skip the group hangout. Someone who used to agree with everything they said suddenly goes quiet when the topic comes up. That's not coincidence. That's people recalculating, quietly, privately, without announcing it, because nobody wants to be the first to say out loud what everyone's starting to feel. Here's what they didn't understand about the people around them. Most people don't actually enjoy cruelty. Most people go along with it because it's easier than standing apart from the group, because disagreeing feels risky, because staying quiet feels safer than drawing attention. But that kind of participation has a shelf life. Eventually, the discomfort outweighs the convenience. Eventually, somebody looks at what they've been quietly agreeing with and doesn't like what they see reflected back. Imagine a group of people standing around a fire, all agreeing it's warm, until one person finally admits they've been getting burned the whole time. Once one person says it, the rest start feeling the heat too. That's what's happening around them right now. One person stepped back, then another noticed. Then the group that used to move as one unit started fragmenting, quietly, without a big announcement, without a dramatic confrontation, just a slow drift away from the center they used to orbit. And that drift is the loudest thing happening in their life right now, even though nobody's saying a word about it directly. Why does a support system collapse so quietly instead of all at once? because people protect their own image before they protect anyone else's. Nobody wants to be remembered as the person who stood by someone who turned out to be the villain of the story. So they distance themselves first, and they explain it to themselves later. They tell themselves they were never really that close, that they always had doubts, that they saw this coming, even if none of that was true when it mattered. That's what's happening to the people who used to back them up. One by one, they're rewriting their own involvement, quietly retreating before they're associated with a story nobody wants to be part of anymore. And that leaves them standing exactly where they never expected to be standing, alone in a room that used to be full of people who had their back. What makes this particular kind of collapse so brutal is how invisible it is while it's happening. There's no single dramatic exit. Nobody storms out and announces they're done. It's quieter than that, and quieter is worse, because there's no moment to argue against, no specific accusation to defend, just a slow accumulation of absences that eventually adds up to something undeniable. They probably noticed it first in small logistics. A group chat that used to be active going quiet, an event that used to include them happening without an invite, not out of cruelty, just because nobody thought to include them anymore, which somehow stings even more than being deliberately excluded. Being forgotten carries a different kind of weight than being rejected, because rejection at least means you mattered enough to push away on purpose. Being forgotten means you've already stopped mattering at all. And the people doing the forgetting, they're not doing it out of some noble stand for the truth. Most of them are doing it for the same reason they went along with everything in the first place: self-preservation. It's simply safer now to drift than to stay close. That's an uncomfortable thing to sit with if you're on the receiving end of it, because it means the loyalty was never really about them as a person. It was about convenience, and convenience has officially run out. Imagine spending years building what you thought were real relationships, only to watch every single one of them evaporate the second staying close stopped being easy. That's the lesson landing right now, one quiet absence at a time. And there's no explanation they can give that undoes what everyone's already decided for themselves. That's chapter 3, and it's why their face isn't showing up anywhere it used to. Number 4. The excuses stopped working the moment people compared notes. For a while, their strategy worked because it relied on isolation. Tell one version of the story to one person, a slightly different version to another, and count on those two people never sitting down together and comparing what they were told. That strategy has one fatal flaw. People talk, especially when something feels off, especially when two different versions of the same story don't line up the way they should. The moment two people who trusted them sat down and realized their stories didn't match, the whole excuse machine broke down at once. Imagine building a bridge out of two halves that were never actually designed to meet in the middle, and then acting surprised when someone walks across it and falls straight through the gap. That's exactly what happened here. Every excuse they gave one person contradicted an excuse they gave someone else, because they were never telling the truth to begin with, just managing damage in whatever direction it was coming from at the time. And damage control, built on shifting stories, always collapses the second those stories cross paths. When people started noticing the inconsistencies, the questions got sharper. Why did you tell me one thing and tell them something completely different? Why does your story keep changing depending on who's asking? Why do you get defensive the second someone asks for details instead of just answering plainly? Those questions don't have good answers when the truth was never the foundation to begin with. And once people start asking pointed questions instead of accepting vague reassurance, the whole performance falls apart, because performances only work on an audience that isn't paying close attention. This audience started paying attention. Ask yourself why liars always eventually get caught in the details. It's because maintaining multiple versions of a false story requires perfect memory under pressure, and nobody has that. Real memories are consistent because they're real. Fabricated ones shift depending on mood, audience, and how much pressure is being applied in the moment. That inconsistency is what gave them away. Not one dramatic reveal, just dozens of small cracks that eventually became impossible to explain away. Now, every excuse they try to offer gets met with skepticism instead of automatic belief, because the well of trust they were drawing from finally ran dry. There's a particular moment in situations like this where the entire dynamic flips, and it's worth naming clearly. For a long time, they were the default authority on their own story. People believed them first and asked questions later, if they asked at all. That's a privilege most people don't realize they're operating with until it disappears. The moment the inconsistencies piled up high enough, that default flipped completely. Now, instead of being believed first, they're doubted first. Every new explanation gets held up against the pile of contradictions that came before it, and it rarely survives that comparison. That's not people being unfair to them. That's people finally applying the same scrutiny to their story that should have been there from the beginning, and it turns out the story was never built to withstand it. Picture someone standing in front of a group, trying to offer a clean, simple explanation, while everyone in the room is silently cross-referencing it against 3 other versions they've already heard. That's the position they're in every time they open their mouth now. And the tragedy for them is that even if some small part of a new explanation happens to be true, nobody can tell anymore, because the well has been poisoned by every version that came before it. Trust doesn't come back just because someone finally decides to be consistent after months of contradiction. It has to be rebuilt slowly, earned back in small, unglamorous increments, and that's not a process people like this are usually willing to do the work for. It's easier to just stop talking. That's chapter 4, and it's exactly why they've stopped offering explanations altogether. Silence became easier than getting caught in another contradiction. Number 5. The rooms they used to walk into like they owned them. There's a specific kind of energy someone carries when they believe a space belongs to them. When they walk in, expecting attention, expecting agreement, expecting to set the tone the second they arrive. That's exactly how they used to move through certain rooms. Loud without needing to raise their voice. Central without needing to ask for it. Comfortable in a way that only comes from believing nobody there would ever challenge them. That energy is gone now, and everyone around them can feel the difference, even if nobody says it out loud. Imagine someone walking into a party they used to command, and instead of people gravitating toward them the way they used to, conversations pause awkwardly, eye contact gets avoided, and the room's energy shifts into something careful, something guarded. That's not their imagination. That's real, and it's happening because the story caught up to them before they walked through that door. People who once laughed at everything they said are now measuring their words around them, not out of respect, but out of caution. The same caution you'd use around something unpredictable, something you're not quite sure how to read anymore. That shift is humiliating in a way that's hard to describe to someone who hasn't lived it, because it happens without a single confrontation. Nobody has to say anything directly. The room just changes, and they know exactly why. Why does a room's energy shift so completely without anyone saying a word? Because people communicate through more than speech. They communicate through distance, through hesitation, through who they choose to stand next to and who they quietly avoid. And right now, they're the person everyone's quietly avoiding, even the ones who used to fight to be closest to them. That's not something that fades in a week. That's a shift that follows someone into every room they walk into after the story starts circulating, because reputations move faster than explanations ever can. They used to own the room. Now they're the reason the room goes quiet. And there's a difference between those two kinds of silence that everyone in the room understands. even if they never say it out loud. It's worth sitting with how physical this shift actually is, because it's not just a feeling, it shows up in bodies, in posture, in the small unconscious movements people make around someone they've stopped trusting. Shoulders angle away instead of toward them. Conversations that would normally continue pass their arrival trail off instead. People check their phones a beat too quickly, looking for a reason to step outside the interaction rather than stay inside it. None of that requires a single word of confrontation. It's the body language of a room that's made a collective, unspoken decision. And collective, unspoken decisions are often louder than anything said directly, because there's no version of them to argue against. You can't defend yourself against a shift in body language. You can't demand an apology for people simply choosing to stand 3 feet further away than they used to. Imagine spending years reading a room easily, knowing exactly how to command attention the second you walked in, and then losing that ability overnight, not because you forgot how, but because the room itself stopped responding to it. That disorientation is its own kind of exposure. It tells them, more clearly than any conversation could, that the story has already been decided by the people around them, regardless of whether it's ever discussed out loud. And once a room decides something collectively, it rarely reverses that decision just because the person at the center of it wants things to go back to how they were. That's chapter 5, and it's one more reason showing their face has stopped feeling like an option. Number 6. The version of themselves they built started falling apart in public. Everyone curates a version of themselves for the people watching, but some people build that version entirely out of performance, with almost nothing underneath holding it up. That was their approach. Confident on the outside, dismissive of anyone who challenged them, always the one controlling the narrative in every room they entered. But performances require an audience that keeps believing the act. And once enough people stop believing, the performance doesn't just lose its power, it starts actively working against the person putting it on. Imagine an actor who's been playing the same role for years, so convincingly that even they started believing it was real, only to have the curtain pulled back in front of the exact crowd they were performing for. That's what's happening to them right now. Every confident statement they made in the past is now being replayed by people looking for the cracks. And once you start looking for cracks in a performance, you see them everywhere. The forced confidence. The way they changed the subject whenever things got too specific. The way they always had a reason why the story wasn't quite their fault. All of that reads differently now that people know what they know. What used to look like charisma now looks like control. What used to look like leadership now looks like manipulation. The exact same behaviors, viewed through a different lens, and suddenly, none of it holds up the way it used to. Why does a public image collapse so fast once people start questioning it? Because image was never substance to begin with, and substance is the only thing that survives scrutiny. Charisma built on nothing crumbles the second people stop giving it the benefit of the doubt. And that benefit of the doubt is exactly what they lost the moment their actions caught up with their reputation. They're not performing anymore because the audience stopped clapping. And without an audience, a performance is just someone standing alone on an empty stage, wondering how they ended up there. There's something almost tragic in watching a persona collapse this completely, not because they deserve sympathy for it, but because it reveals how little was actually underneath it the whole time. People who build genuine character don't lose themselves the moment an audience stops believing in them, because their sense of self was never dependent on that belief to begin with. People who build performance instead of character have nothing left the moment the performance stops working, because performance was the entire structure. There was no foundation underneath it, just scaffolding dressed up to look like one. That's the part that's becoming visible now, in real time, to everyone who used to admire the confidence without questioning what it was actually built on. The same charm that used to draw people in now reads as calculated. The same quick answers that used to sound impressive now sound rehearsed, like lines pulled from a script, written to control a narrative rather than communicate something true. And once you notice that pattern once, you can't unsee it in everything that came before. Every old interaction gets re-evaluated through the new lens, and very little of it survives that re-evaluation intact. Imagine watching old footage of someone you admired and suddenly noticing all the small manipulations you missed the first time, all the deflections you mistook for depth. That's what's happening to their entire history right now, being re-watched, reassessed, and quietly downgraded by everyone who used to take it at face value. That's Chapter 6, and it explains exactly why the person who used to command every room now avoids stepping into one at all. Number 7. Why apologizing stopped being enough. At some point, they realized the silence around them wasn't going away on its own, and they tried the one move people like this always try last: the apology. Not because they felt genuine remorse, but because they needed the discomfort directed at them to stop. There's a specific kind of apology that isn't really an apology at all. It's a request for the consequences to end. And people can feel the difference between the two almost instantly. A real apology takes accountability without conditions. A damage control apology comes wrapped in excuses, timing designed for maximum sympathy, and a quiet expectation that saying sorry should immediately erase everything that came before it. That's exactly the kind of apology they offered, and it didn't land the way they hoped, because people had already seen the pattern clearly enough to recognize performance when it showed up again in a different costume. Imagine someone who spends months building a fire, then shows up with a small cup of water once the whole forest is already burning, expecting to be thanked for the effort. That's what a late, self-serving apology looks like to people who watch the damage happen in real time. It doesn't undo anything. It just confirms that they only cared once there were consequences attached to not caring. And that realization is exactly what turned a bad situation into an impossible one for them. Because now, even the people who might have forgiven a genuine mistake can see clearly that this wasn't remorse, it was strategy. And strategy doesn't earn back trust the way honesty does. Why does a fake apology make things worse instead of better? Because it proves the point everyone was already starting to suspect, that none of this was ever about the people they hurt. It was always about protecting themselves. And once that becomes obvious, no amount of careful wording in an apology message can undo it. They tried the apology, it didn't work. And now they're left with the one thing they never planned for, a situation where sorry isn't a magic word that resets everything. It's just one more piece of evidence that the story people are telling about them is true. What's worse for them is how the apology itself became a kind of confession. Because to apologize convincingly, even insincerely, you have to reference specifics, and specifics are exactly what they'd spent months avoiding giving anyone. The moment they wrote out an apology that named what actually happened, even in the softest, most self-protective language they could manage, they confirmed every piece of the story they'd been quietly denying up to that point. That's the trap. Poorly timed apologies always spring on the person offering them. Silence, at least, leaves room for doubt. An apology closes that room completely, because you can't apologize for something you claim never happened. Imagine spending months insisting a fire never started, and then handing everyone a bucket of water anyway, not realizing the water itself proves you knew the fire was real the whole time. That's exactly the position their apology put them in. It wasn't read as remorse. It was read as an admission dressed up in soft language, timed to arrive right when the pressure became unbearable, rather than when it would have actually meant something. And once people recognize an apology as strategy, instead of sincerity, it doesn't just fail to help, it actively confirms every suspicion it was meant to quiet. That's chapter 7, and it's why they've stopped trying to explain themselves altogether. Number 8. The fear that replaced the confidence. Confidence and fear can't occupy the same space for very long, and right now fear is winning completely. This isn't the manufactured confidence they used to wear like armor. This is real, uncomfortable, gut-level fear. The kind that shows up in small physical tells that people around them are starting to notice. The hesitation before answering a simple question. The way they check who's in a room before deciding whether to walk in. The way certain topics make them visibly tense in a way they never used to be. That's not guilt performing for an audience. That's actual fear. The kind that comes from knowing the ground underneath you isn't solid anymore. Imagine someone who spent years walking across a bridge without a second thought, only to be told mid-crossing that the supports underneath have been quietly failing the entire time. That sudden awareness, that shift from certainty to dread, that's exactly what they're carrying now. They don't know who knows what. They don't know who's still willing to defend them and who's quietly done. They don't know if the next conversation is going to be normal or if it's going to be the one where someone finally says out loud what everyone's been thinking. That uncertainty is its own kind of punishment, and it's one they built entirely for themselves. Why does fear replace confidence so completely once someone's actions catch up with them? Because confidence was never built on anything real. It was built on the assumption that consequences don't apply to people who move fast enough and talk loud enough to outrun them. Once that assumption breaks, there's nothing left to stand on, and fear rushes in to fill the space where certainty used to be. You didn't have to threaten them. You didn't have to confront them. You didn't have to do a single aggressive thing to create this fear in them. It exists because they know, deep down, exactly what they did, and knowing that is enough to keep anyone up at night. This kind of fear has a specific texture to it that's different from ordinary worry. It's the fear of an unfinished conversation, the sense that something is still coming, even when nothing visible is happening. It shows up in the small hours, when nothing distracts from it anymore, when the phone is quiet and the room is dark and there's nothing left to perform for. That's when it gets loudest, because performance is exhausting, and exhaustion eventually forces even the most guarded person to sit alone with what they actually did, without an audience to soften the reality of it. Imagine spending your whole life certain that consequences were something that happened to other people, something you were somehow exempt from because you'd always found a way around them before, and then, for the first time, feeling that certainty crack. That crack doesn't heal quickly. It sits there, reopening every time their name gets mentioned somewhere they can't control, every time a message goes unanswered a little too long, every time they catch a look on someone's face that used to mean nothing and now means everything. Fear like that doesn't announce itself loudly. It just sits underneath every interaction, quietly reshaping how a person moves through their own life, until the person who used to walk into rooms without a second thought is now calculating every entrance, every exit, every conversation, trying to figure out how much longer they can keep the fear from showing on the outside, the way it's already consuming them on the inside. That's chapter 8, and it's the quiet, private terror sitting underneath every careful move they're making right now. Number 9. Why hiding became easier than facing it. There's a pattern people fall into once shame outweighs their ability to cope with it, and that pattern is disappearance. Not literally vanishing, but socially retreating, avoiding, going quiet in places they used to be loud, letting invitations go unanswered, letting conversations trail off instead of engaging. That's exactly what's happening now. It's easier to disappear than to face a room full of people who know the truth. Easier to avoid a conversation than to sit inside the discomfort of being seen clearly for the first time. Imagine someone who spent their whole life being the center of attention, suddenly discovering that attention now feels like exposure instead of admiration. That shift is disorienting in a way that changes how a person moves through the world entirely. They used to seek out rooms full of people. Now they calculate who's going to be somewhere before deciding whether to show up at all. That's not privacy. That's avoidance, and everyone around them can tell the difference, even if nobody says it directly. Why does hiding feel safer than facing the consequences head-on? Because facing it requires accountability, and accountability requires admitting, out loud, in front of people, that the story everyone's been piecing together is true. That admission is more than most people who operate this way can handle, because their entire identity was built on being the one in control of the narrative, and there's no version of genuine accountability that leaves them in control, so they hide instead. They let silence do the work that honesty should have done. But silence doesn't actually protect anyone. It just delays the moment, and it confirms, to everyone watching, that there's something worth hiding from in the first place. Innocent people don't usually need to disappear. Innocent people show up, answer questions, and let the truth speak for them because they're not afraid of what it says. The fact that they're choosing disappearance over that option tells its own story, one that doesn't need a single extra word from you to make its point. There's an important distinction worth making here, because disappearance in this context isn't the same as healthy boundaries or quiet self-protection. Those things come from a place of peace, a decision to step back because it's genuinely healthier, not because staying visible would mean facing something uncomfortable. What's happening with them is different. It's reactive. It's not built on well-being, it's built on avoidance. And avoidance always has a shelf life, because the world doesn't actually pause and wait for someone to feel ready to face what they've done. Life keeps moving. People keep talking. Situations keep coming up where their name gets mentioned whether they're in the room or not. And every absence just adds another layer to the story instead of erasing it. Imagine trying to skip an exam by simply not showing up, believing that somehow means the test never happened. The test still happened. Everyone else in the room still took it. The only difference is that your name is now attached to an empty seat instead of an answer, and an empty seat raises more questions than a wrong answer ever would have. That's exactly what their absence is doing right now. Every skipped event, every unanswered message, every quiet retreat from a space they used to occupy confidently is being noticed, catalogued, and quietly added to the exact story they're trying so hard to avoid being part of. Disappearing was supposed to make the discomfort go away. Instead, it became the loudest confirmation yet that there was something worth disappearing from in the first place. That's chapter 9, and it's the exact reason their face has stopped showing up anywhere it used to. Number 10. What silence exposed that confrontation never could. Here's the part that took them completely by surprise. They expected you to come at them, to confront them, to give them a target to argue with, deflect from, and eventually spin into a story where they were somehow the misunderstood one. They were ready for that fight. What they weren't ready for was you saying nothing at all. Your silence didn't give them anything to push against. There was no argument to win, no confrontation to twist, no dramatic moment they could later describe as you overreacting. There was just quiet, steady, unshaken presence, and that quiet did more damage to their story than any confrontation ever could have. Imagine trying to win a fight against someone who never shows up to throw a punch. Every move you planned becomes useless. Every counterattack you prepared has nowhere to land. That's exactly the position they found themselves in. They built their entire strategy around anticipating your reaction, and when that reaction never came the way they expected, they had nothing left to work with except the truth, sitting there, unchallenged, unavoidable, and completely on its own. Why does silence expose more than arguing ever could? Because arguing gives people something to react to, something to distort, something to use as evidence that you're just as difficult as they claimed. Silence gives them nothing except the space to sit with what they did, uninterrupted, without a distraction to point to. People fill silence with their own guilt when there's nothing else competing for that space. And that's exactly what happened here. They filled it with panic, with second-guessing, with the slow, creeping realization that nobody was coming to save the story they'd built, because there was no story left to defend once the noise died down. You didn't have to say a word. Your calm did the talking, and it said more than any argument ever could have. There's a reason this specific dynamic catches people like them so completely off guard. Their entire approach was built around reading a room, adjusting in real time, spinning a reaction into whatever version served them best in the moment. That skill only works when there's material to spin. Silence removes the material. There's no tone to twist into something it wasn't. There's no facial expression to describe as aggressive or unstable to a third party later. There's just steadiness, and steadiness is nearly impossible to reframe as anything other than exactly what it is. Imagine someone who's built their entire ability to survive conflict around being the loudest, quickest, most reactive person in the room, suddenly finding themselves across from someone who simply refuses to play that particular game. It's disorienting in a way that goes beyond frustration. It removes the entire toolkit they've relied on for years, leaving them standing there with nothing but their own actions to account for, no distraction to point to, no reaction to mischaracterize, nothing except the plain, unarguable truth of what happened. That kind of exposure is far more uncomfortable than any confrontation could have been, because confrontation at least gives you something to fight against. This gave them nothing but themselves, reflected back with total clarity, and clarity like that doesn't fade just because someone wishes it would. That's chapter 10, and it's the exact reason they can't explain, even to themselves, how something so quiet managed to unravel them so completely. Number 11. Why every attempt to rebuild their image made it worse. Once they realized the damage was real, they tried to fix it the way people like this always try to fix things, through image management instead of honesty. New posts designed to look thoughtful. New behavior designed to look reformed. New friendliness aimed at exactly the people most likely to talk about it publicly. But image management only works on people who don't already know the truth, and by that point, too many people already did. Imagine someone repainting a house with a crumbling foundation, hoping a fresh coat of paint will stop anyone from noticing the cracks running through the walls. That's exactly the strategy they tried, and it failed for the same reason it always fails. Cosmetic changes don't fix structural problems, they just make the eventual collapse more obvious, because everyone can see the gap between the performance and the reality underneath it. People started noticing how sudden the change was, how conveniently timed it was, how it only started once consequences showed up, instead of coming from genuine reflection. That timing gave the whole thing away. Genuine growth doesn't usually arrive perfectly synchronized with the moment someone gets caught. It arrives slowly, privately, without an audience required to validate it. This wasn't that. This was a performance layered on top of an already collapsed performance. And people can tell the difference even when they can't always articulate why something feels off. Why does a rebuild attempt often make things worse instead of better? Because it proves, again, that the concern was never about the people they hurt. It was about controlling how they're perceived. And once an audience catches on to that pattern twice, they stop giving the benefit of the doubt a third time. Every new attempt to look better just becomes more proof of exactly who they are underneath the effort. There's a particular exhaustion that sets in once someone realizes every move they make is being read as strategy instead of sincerity. because it means there's no clean path back, no single gesture large enough to undo the pattern that's already been established. They can post something thoughtful, and it gets read as calculated. They can go quiet, and it gets read as guilt. They can reach out privately, and it gets read as damage control. There's no version of behavior left that gets the benefit of the doubt, because the benefit of the doubt is exactly what they spent, carelessly, over and over, until there was none left to draw from. Imagine trying to convince people a fire is out by showing them a photo of the ashes, when what they actually want is to walk through the house themselves and see for certain that nothing is still smoldering underneath the surface. That's the gap between what they're offering and what would actually be required to rebuild any real trust. Photos of ashes, curated, timed, and controlled, will never be as convincing as time, consistency, and the kind of quiet accountability that doesn't ask for credit while it's happening. They haven't offered that. They've offered performance, again, dressed in the language of growth. And people who've already been fooled once by the exact same performance aren't rushing to be fooled by it twice. That's chapter 12, and it's why nothing they try seems to be working anymore, no matter how hard they try it. Number 12. Why showing their face now feels impossible. At this point, the fear isn't abstract anymore. It's specific. It's the fear of walking into a room and feeling every eye shift toward them. It's the fear of a conversation stalling the second they join it. It's the fear of being remembered, permanently, as the person in this story who caused the damage, instead of the person who suffered it. That fear doesn't fade with time the way they hoped it would. It compounds, because every day that passes without addressing it honestly is another day the story sets deeper into how people see them. Imagine wearing a mask you built yourself, so convincingly that people believed it for years, and then having it slip in front of everyone at once, revealing something you spent your whole life trying to hide, even from yourself. That's what showing their face means to them now. It's not just social discomfort. It's confronting a version of themselves they've been avoiding for a long time, one that existed underneath the performance the whole time, waiting for the moment the performance stopped working. Why does facing people feel so much harder than facing consequences in private? Because private consequences can be rationalized, minimized, explained away in the quiet of your own head. Public exposure doesn't allow for that kind of comfortable self-deception. It forces a confrontation with how other people actually see you, stripped of the story you've been telling yourself. That confrontation is the thing they're avoiding right now, and it's why every excuse, every disappearance, every quiet retreat exists for one single purpose: delaying that moment for as long as possible. But delay isn't the same as escape. It just means the moment is still coming, sitting there, waiting, patient, in a way that they are clearly not. There's something almost merciless about how patient truth can afford to be, precisely because it isn't in a hurry the way people are. People get tired. People want resolution, closure, an ending they can move past. Truth doesn't need any of that. It simply exists, unchanged, whether it's addressed today, next month, or years from now. And every day it goes unaddressed. It doesn't weaken. It just sits there gathering weight, becoming a little heavier, a little harder to face, a little more embedded into how people remember the story. That's the trap of delay. It feels, in the moment, like relief. It never actually is. Imagine carrying something heavy up a hill, telling yourself you'll set it down once you reach the top, except the top keeps moving further away every time you get close, because setting it down was never actually part of the plan, just the story you told yourself to keep moving forward without addressing the weight directly. That's what avoidance has become for them. Not a solution, just a way of postponing a moment that refuses to expire. And somewhere, quietly, underneath all the careful avoidance, they already know that. They know the moment doesn't disappear just because they've successfully dodged it today. They know it's still there, waiting for the day the dodging finally runs out of road. That's chapter 14, and it's the exact mechanism behind every single move they've made since this all started. Number 13. The final judgment nobody had to hand down. Here's the part that matters most, chosen one. You didn't do this. You didn't orchestrate a downfall. You didn't spend your energy plotting anyone's exposure. You just kept being yourself, kept refusing to shrink, kept staying calm while everything around them started falling apart under the weight of their own choices. That's the entire story. Not revenge, not a scheme, just consequences arriving exactly where they were always going to arrive, on their own timeline, without needing your help to get there. Imagine planting nothing, building nothing, scheming nothing, and still watching an entire structure collapse simply because it was never built on anything solid to begin with. That's what happened here. They messed with the wrong one, not because you fought back with force, but because you were never the fragile target they assumed you were. Your steadiness was the one thing they couldn't manipulate, couldn't out-argue, couldn't spin into a different story. And that steadiness is exactly what outlasted every lie they told. Why does this always end the same way for people who underestimate someone calm? Because calm isn't the absence of strength, it's strength that doesn't need an audience to prove itself. They mistook that for an opening. It was never an opening. It was the exact quality that would eventually make their downfall undeniable. Because nobody could claim you provoked it. Nobody could claim you overreacted. Nobody could point to anything except their own actions as the reason they're hiding right now. That's the judgment. Not loud, not dramatic, not delivered by anyone standing in a spotlight demanding an apology. Just quiet, complete, and entirely their own doing. And here's something worth carrying forward from all of this, chosen one, because it matters beyond this one story. None of what happened required you to become bitter or vengeful or someone who needed the collapse of another person to feel whole. You didn't need their downfall to validate you. You were already whole before any of this unraveled, and you'll still be whole long after this stops being something people talk about. What happened to them isn't the point of your story. It's just the footnote that confirms what you already knew standing in the middle of it, that you were never the problem, that your calm was never weakness, that staying yourself under pressure was always going to be the thing that outlasted whatever they were trying to build against you. Imagine looking back at this entire chapter of your life, a year from now, not with anger, not with the need to replay every detail, but with a kind of quiet clarity, the way you'd look back at a storm you walked through without needing to run. That's where this is heading for you. Not a victory lap, not a scoreboard, just peace, earned the hard way, by refusing to become someone else, just to survive people who were never worth the transformation. They get to sit with what they built. You get to keep walking, exactly as you are, into whatever comes next. You get to walk forward from here, exactly the way you walked through all of it, steady, unshaken, and finally, undeniably, seen for who you actually were the whole time. Chosen one, that's the whole story laid out plainly. They messed with the wrong one. They mistook your quiet for an invitation, and it turned into the very thing that exposed them. Nothing about what happened required you to become someone else, to fight louder, to chase them down for accountability. You just stayed exactly who you were, and the truth handled the rest on its own timeline. If this hit something real in you, if you've lived a version of this story and you're still waiting for your own reversal, drop a 77 in the comments right now and let this message find the next person who needs to hear it. Hit like, hit subscribe, and if you want to help keep messages like this reaching people, the super thanks button means more than you know. Share this with someone who's still standing in their own silence, wondering if it's doing anything at all. Tell them it is. Thanks for watching, chosen one. We'll see you in the next one. Take care and goodbye.